The light off the chandelier found the ring on her finger a half-second before it found his face. Elena Alvarez stood in the exact center of her own birthday gala, in a cream silk slip dress that had cost more than most people's cars. Her fingers laced tight through a large, calloused hand that did not belong in this room and knew it. And the ballroom went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a toast about to begin, but the other kind. The kind that happens when old money smells something it can't buy, sell, or control. Her mother's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips, gold gown shimmering, a fortune in diamonds frozen at her throat. Her father's mouth fell open mid-breath, his silver hair catching the light. Every ounce of aristocratic composure simply gone from his face. Across the room, Julian did not so much as blink. "Dad? Mom?" Elena's voice did not shake, though the hand laced through Marcus's did, just slightly. "Meet my fiancé." The man beside her wore a navy blue suit that fit him well, and he stood a full head taller than anyone near him, a calm in him that the whole panicking room did not have. He wasn't looking at Elena's parents. He was looking down at Elena with a tender half-smile, the way a man looks at the only person in a crowd who has ever actually seen him. Nobody in that ballroom had known his name a year ago. By the time this is over, some of them will wish they never learned it. The silence held for 4 full seconds, which is an eternity when 300 of the city's wealthiest people are holding their breath at the same time. Elena's mother set her glass down on a passing tray without drinking from it, her hand betraying nothing while her eyes betrayed everything. Her father, a man who had shaken hands with governors and foreign ministers without flinching, looked down at the calluses on Marcus's palm, the hands of a man who worked for a living, and could not find a single word. The string quartet in the corner played on, oblivious, until a waiter caught the conductor's eye and drew a finger across his throat. It was Julian who moved first. He stepped out of the crowd with the easy smile of a man who had already decided exactly how this night was going to end. Elena, warm, smooth, loud enough to carry. "I think perhaps the introductions can wait until after your father's toast, don't you? Let's not overwhelm your guests." He did not look at Marcus. He looked past him, the precise, practiced way people look past a piece of furniture that has somehow wandered into the wrong room. A few guests laughed, the thin, nervous laughter that fills a silence rather than breaks it, and the quartet started up again a beat too eagerly. But Elena did not let go of Marcus's hand, and Julian, still smiling, was already doing the math behind his eyes. Because if Elena married outside the family's approval, a decades-old clause buried deep in the generational trust would be triggered. And Julian had spent 3 patient years waiting for exactly the excuse that had just walked through the door in a navy suit. What Julian didn't know, what none of them in that glittering room could have guessed, was that the working-class stranger holding the heiress's hand had saved this family's entire empire once before, 12 years ago, anonymously, with his own 2 calloused hands and a set of blueprints no one had ever traced back to him. And Elena, whose whole life had been spent smiling for people like this, keeping the peace, keeping up the appearance, swallowing every true thing she'd ever felt. Elena lifted her chin, looked her stunned father dead in the eye, and did not smile to soften it. "Say hello, Dad," she said quietly. "He's not going anywhere." 9 months earlier, none of this existed. 9 months earlier, there was only a storm, a failing engine, and a weathered repair shop on the working edge of the harbor. And a woman who had no idea that walking through its door was about to cost her everything she'd been raised to protect, and hand her the only thing she'd ever actually wanted. Tap that subscribe button, because trust me, Julian has no idea what's coming, and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from tonight. Your city, your corner of the world, wherever you are, drop it below. I read every single one, and I'd love nothing more than to send a great big hello your way and see just how far around the globe this love story can reach. 9 months before the ballroom, before the ring, before 300 people forgot how to breathe at once, there was only the storm. Elena Alvarez had not planned to be on the water that afternoon. She'd taken the family's smaller vessel out alone to escape a board meeting that had left her hands shaking under the table, and the coast had turned on her the way coasts do. A gray wall of weather rolling in off the horizon, faster than the forecast, meaner than the radar promised. Something deep in the hull gave a sound she'd never heard a boat make, a low structural groan, and then the engine simply stopped, and the wheel went dead in her hands. She drifted toward the working edge of the harbor on the swells, past the polished marinas where boats like hers belonged, into the gritty stretch of the docks where the water smelled of diesel and salt and old rope, and she coasted, half terrified, up to a weathered repair shop with a hand-painted sign and a light still on inside. That was where she first saw him. Marcus was bent over the exposed ribs of a hull, sleeves shoved to the elbow, and he did not look up right away when she called out. Not out of rudeness, she'd realize later, but because he was in the middle of something that mattered, and he finished it first. When he did turn, she saw a broad-shouldered man with a close-trimmed beard, and a calm in him that the whole panicking day had lacked. He listened to her describe the sound the boat had made, nodded once, and said, "That's not the engine. That's the frame. Your engine quit, because it knew something you didn't." And he was right. She watched him work for 3 hours in the failing light, while the storm hammered the tin roof. She had been raised among men who commanded, and men who delegated, and men who signed things, and she had never once, in her entire life, watched a man simply build, watched hands that knew a thing so completely they didn't need to think about it. He talked her through every step, not talking down, just telling the truth about what was broken and how it would be fixed. And in the corner, on a scrubbed steel tool bench with a lamp pulled close, a small girl of about 9 sat doing long division in a workbook, glancing up now and then to study the strange, elegant woman who had blown in with the weather. "That's Lily," Marcus said, following her gaze. "Don't let her sell you anything. She's saving up for a telescope and she thinks everyone's a customer." Lily looked up, unbothered. "It's a good telescope," she said. "You look rich. Do you want to invest?" Elena laughed, the first real laugh she'd managed in weeks, and crouched down by the bench to look at the brochure the girl produced from nowhere, and something in her chest that had been clenched for years quietly came loose. There was no performance here. No one wanted anything from her that she couldn't freely give. By the time the storm broke and the boat was seaworthy again, Elena had already decided, without admitting it to herself, that she would find a reason to come back. She came back the next week, and the week after that. And somewhere in the months that followed, in that workshop that smelled of diesel and rain, a razor-sharp heiress who had never let anyone see her frightened learned what it felt like to be safe. Which was why, in the ballroom 9 months later, she did not let go of his hand. But the man who moved first, Julian, was not a man who accepted an ending he hadn't authored. He waited until the toasts had begun, and the crowd's attention had drifted, and then he appeared at Elena's elbow and murmured that they should speak, privately, on the terrace. She went, because refusing would have made a scene, and because she wanted to hear him say out loud what she already knew was coming. The terrace overlooked the harbor, the same black water that had delivered Marcus to her, and the city lights smeared gold across it. Julian lit a cigarette he didn't smoke, and let the silence stretch before he spoke. "That was quite a performance," he said. "Your grandmother would call it spirited. I'd call it expensive." He turned to face her, and the warm public smile was gone now, replaced by something flatter and colder. "You've read the trust, Elena. Don't pretend you haven't. There's language in there your great-grandfather wrote when this family still cared about bloodlines. A marriage outside the board's approval triggers a review of your operational authority. One phone call. That's all it takes to convene them. You've been waiting for this," Elena said. 3 years you've sat in those meetings agreeing with everything my father says, and you've been waiting." "I've been patient," Julian corrected. "There's a difference, and it's the difference between us." He tapped ash over the railing. "Here's what happens next. You walk back inside. You laugh the whole thing off as a birthday joke. The dock worker goes back to his little shop, and none of this ever happened. Or," he let the word hang, "or I make some calls, and by the end of the quarter you're a former CEO. Your fiancé is a headline. And that sweet little girl of his learns exactly what people like us do to people like them. Think carefully, Elena. You've only ever been good at keeping the peace. Don't get brave now. It doesn't suit the dress." He crushed the cigarette and walked back inside, and Elena stood alone on the terrace with her heart slamming, understanding that the war had already started and she'd fired the first shot without meaning to. Inside, someone else had been watching Marcus all evening, but not with contempt. Eleanor, Elena's grandmother, was 81 years old and missed nothing. She sat in her chair near the windows with a glass of untouched sherry and studied the tall stranger her granddaughter had claimed. And what caught her attention was not his suit or his color or his calloused hands. It was the way he moved. The way, when a waiter stumbled and a tray of glasses tipped, Marcus's hand shot out and steadied it before anyone else had even registered the fall. An economy of motion, a precision, a man who understood load and balance and stress in his bones. She had seen that quality exactly once before, a long time ago, in a set of drawings that had saved everything her late husband built. Eleanor leaned toward the quiet young man who served as her assistant and driver, the one person in the family she trusted without reservation. "David," she said softly. "The maritime archives from the dry dock crisis. 12 years ago, the engineer whose name we never got." Her old eyes did not leave Marcus. "The board sealed those records. I want them unsealed, quietly. Tonight, if you can manage it. David hesitated. Those files are locked under the company's legal hold, ma'am. If Julian's people notice, then don't let them notice. She finally sipped the sherry. I've buried 3 husbands and outlived 4 rivals, David. I did not do it by being careless. Bring me the drawings. I'd like to see if an old woman still remembers a good line when she sees one. Julian, meanwhile, had decided not to wait for the board at all. 2 days after the party, he sent Marcus a message asking to meet, man to man, he called it, at a chrome and vinyl diner on the industrial stretch near the shipping yards. The kind of place with truckers at the counter and bottomless coffee, and no one who'd recognize either of them. Marcus came because he was not a man who hid from a conversation. He slid into the booth across from Julian, ordered black coffee, and waited. Julian did the talking. He talked about worlds and where people belonged in them. He talked about the pressure Elena was under, the damage this was doing to her, how a man who truly cared for her would want to spare her all of it. And then, when the speech was done, he lifted a slim briefcase onto the table, turned it toward Marcus, and opened it. Neat banded stacks of cash filled the interior. $200,000, Julian said. Cash. No paper, no strings. You take it, you take that bright little girl of yours somewhere warm, you start over. Buy her that telescope. I'll even double it in 6 months if you stay gone. All you have to do is disappear before you drag Elena down with you. He closed his hands loosely. Everyone has a number, Mr. Vance. I've simply saved us both the tedium of finding yours. Marcus looked at the money for a long moment. Then he looked at Julian, and something in his calm face did not move at all. You know what's funny? Marcus said quietly. My daughter asked you to invest in her telescope the first night she met a rich person, and I told her not everyone's a customer. He slid the briefcase back across the table, unhurried, and it stopped exactly at the table's edge in front of Julian. You think you're offering me a fortune? You're offering me the one thing I already walked away from once, and I didn't take it then either. I've been broke, Mr. Alvarez. Broke doesn't scare me. You know what scares me? Raising a daughter who thinks a man's price is the truest thing about him. He stood, dropped $2 for his coffee, and buttoned his jacket. Keep your money. And tell Elena's cousin the mechanic said no. He'll enjoy hearing it that way. He walked out, and Julian sat alone with an open briefcase full of cash, and the deeply unfamiliar sensation of a man he could not buy. That was when the calls started. A blocked number. Late at night. A voice run through something that flattened it into gravel. The first time it only breathed. The second time it named Lily's school. The third time it said, plainly, that a harbor was a dangerous place for a little girl who liked to watch the water, and that Marcus had until the end of the month to take her somewhere far away, and that this was the kind offer, and there wouldn't be another. Marcus stood in the dark of his workshop with the phone against his ear, and his free hand curled into a fist so tight his knuckles ached. And for the first time since his wife died, he felt the specific terror of a man who has exactly one irreplaceable thing in the world and cannot armor it. He did not tell Elena about the calls. He should have. He didn't, because he was already doing the same math Julian was counting on him to do. The math that ended with him and Lily gone, and Elena safe, and the whole beautiful, impossible thing folded up and put away before it could get his daughter hurt. And Elena had her own siege to survive. Her parents summoned her to the house, not asked, summoned, and she found them waiting in the formal sitting room like a tribunal. Her father rigid with silver-haired fury, her mother's jaw set hard beneath her diamonds. You will end it, her father said, without preamble. Quietly, you'll issue no statement, and you will step down as CEO before the next earnings call, for the good of the name, and let the board install an interim while this episode is forgotten. He could not even bring himself to say Marcus. We have protected this family for 4 generations, Elena. I will not watch you set fire to it over a man who fixes boats. He's a good man, Elena said. You'd know that if you'd said one word to him instead of looking through him. Good men, her mother said icily, do not need heiresses. Ask yourself what he needs, darling. Ask yourself what any of them need. And Elena looked at the 2 people who had raised her to smile and swallow and keep the peace. And for the first time in her life, she did not do any of those things. She stood, smoothed her dress, and said, You want me to choose between the company and Marcus. I want you to understand something. If you make me choose, you will not like which one I pick, and it will be the last choice you ever get to make for me. Then she walked out, past her mother's gasp and her father's silence, and drove straight to the harbor as the sky began. Once again, too darkened with a storm. The rain caught her at the docks. She ran the last stretch and ducked into Marcus's workshop just as the sky opened, and he looked up from the bench, surprised. and then not surprised at all, because some part of him had been waiting for her to come. She was soaked and shaking and finally, mercifully, out of the reach of everyone who wanted something from her. The rain came down in sheets on the tin roof, that specific drumming sound, and the whole world narrowed to the warm lamplit space and the two of them inside it. She told him everything: the trust clause, the board, Julian on the terrace, her parents' ultimatum, the very real possibility that she was going to lose the company her family had spent a century building, that she would be the Alvarez who let it slip through her fingers, and that the fear of it had lived in her chest so long she'd stopped noticing it was there. "I don't know who I am if I'm not the one holding it together," she admitted, her voice breaking. "That's the awful truth. They built me to carry it, and I don't know how to put it down." Marcus set down his tools. He came and sat beside her on the bench where Lily did her homework, and for a while he just let the rain fill the silence. Then he said, "You know what I do when a hull comes in twisted? Everybody wants me to fix the part that's bent. The bent part's not the problem. The bent part's just where the failure showed up. The problem's always the foundation, the keel, the thing everything else is built on. You fix the foundation, the rest holds." He looked at her. "Your family built you on stock prices and a name. That's a foundation that bends the second the weather turns. You want to know who you are without the company? You're the woman who drifted into my shop in a storm and crouched down to look at my kid's telescope brochure like it was the most important document in the world. That's the keel, Elena. That's the part that holds. The company is just the part that's bent." She cried then, properly, the way she hadn't let herself in years. And he didn't try to stop her or fix it, he just stayed. And the rain came down, and somewhere in that long, sheltered hour, Elena stopped being afraid of losing the empire, because she'd finally found the thing underneath it that couldn't be taken. While the storm raged over the harbor, old Eleanor's quiet campaign was bearing fruit. David, her assistant, had done more than unseal the archives. He'd been watching Julian for weeks on Eleanor's instruction, and one late night in the empty executive suite, with Julian's laptop left open and unlocked in his arrogance, David copied a drive. What he found turned his stomach. Encrypted email chains, buried under Shell Corporation names, dozens of them. Meridian Logistics, Coastal Freight Partners. A web of paper companies that all traced back, through 3 careful layers, to Julian. And in those emails, instructions. Payments to men with no fixed employer. Shipping routes altered at the last minute to send Alvarez cargo through waters where it would be delayed, damaged, lost. The logistics failures that had been bleeding the company for 2 years, tanking the stock, making Elena look like a CEO who couldn't hold her own house together. None of them were accidents. Julian had been manufacturing the crisis, brick by brick, so that when the board finally moved to strip Elena of her authority, the numbers would already tell his story for him. David brought the drive to Eleanor. She read it all, twice, her face giving away nothing, and then she folded her hands and said, "Not yet. We don't move on a snake by grabbing its tail. We wait until he's all the way out of his hole." She looked toward the window, toward the harbor, "And we're going to need the engineer. It's time someone told my granddaughter the truth about the man she loves." That truth found Elena a few days later in Eleanor's study. She'd come to talk to her grandmother, the one family member who hadn't turned on her, and while she waited, she noticed a long, flat archival folder open on the desk. Inside were blueprints, old ones, the paper gone soft and yellow at the edges, technical drawings of a dry dock's load-bearing structure, dense with handwritten calculations in the margins. And she went still, because she knew that handwriting. She had seen it on the back of Lily's homework, on invoices in the workshop, on a note left on her car one morning that said, "Drive safe, the roads flood by the pier." The precise, blocky, unmistakable print was Marcus's. She drove to the harbor with the folder on the passenger seat and laid it on the workbench without a word, and Marcus looked at it, and the color left his face, and he sat down heavily like a man setting down something he'd carried a very long way. 12 years ago, he said finally, I was a structural engineer, Navy first, then contract work, the hard jobs, the ones nobody else could figure out. Your family's dry docks were failing, a design flaw in the original load system, and if it went, it would have taken the whole fleet down with it and bankrupted the company overnight. They put out a quiet call for anyone who could save it. I looked at the drawings and I saw how to do it. He ran a thumb along the yellowed edge of the paper. Took me 4 months. I re-engineered the entire bearing structure. I never signed it, never took the credit, never took the bonus they offered. I just fixed it and left. Why? Elena whispered. Why would you save all of this and never tell anyone? Never tell me? Because a year after that, my wife got sick. His voice went rough, and I watched that world. The elite world, the one your family lives in. Chew people up and spit them out and call it ambition. I had a daughter who was about to lose her mother, and I decided I would rather she grow up in a workshop that smelled like rain than in a tower full of people who'd teach her that her worth was a number. He looked up. I didn't hide it from you to lie to you, Elena. I hid it because I spent 12 years becoming a man who didn't need any of them to know. And then you walked into my shop, and for the first time I had a reason to wish I'd stayed the kind of man who could stand in your father's ballroom without borrowing a suit. Elena took his calloused hand in both of hers. You saved them once and they never even knew your name, she said. It's time they learned it. Marcus did not go to Elena's father to beg. That was the part that undid the old man in the end. He came to the Alvarez house in his clean navy suit, was shown coldly into the study, and when Elena's father began the practice speech about worlds and where people belonged, Marcus simply stepped forward and laid a single sheet of paper on the desk. His original handwritten calculations. 12 years old, the load equations that had saved the dry dock, in the same hand as the blueprint the man had signed off on and framed on his own office wall as a symbol of the company's resilience. Elena's father looked at the paper, then at Marcus, then back at the paper, and the color drained slowly out of his aristocratic face as the pieces slid into place. The anonymous engineer, the miracle that had saved his fortune, the man his family had spent every quarter since congratulating themselves for surviving. You, he said. It came out as barely a breath. I don't need your approval to marry your daughter, Marcus said quietly. She's a grown woman, and she's already decided. I came here so that when this is over, you'll know I never once needed anything from this family. Your company would be rubble at the bottom of that harbor if I'd needed things. I fixed it and asked for nothing, and I'd have gone the rest of my life letting you believe it saved itself. He picked his paper back up, folded it, and returned it to his pocket. Your daughter is the best thing that ever drifted into my shop. You've got one chance left to deserve being in the same room as her when I marry her. I'd think hard about it. He left the old man standing speechless in his own study, holding nothing. The board convened its emergency session as a gala, because Julian could never resist an audience. In the same marble atrium, the same chandeliers, reporters lining the walls, shareholders in their finest. Julian took the stage first, radiant with anticipated victory, and began his presentation. Falsified background checks bloomed on the massive screen behind him. Marcus painted as a fraud, an uneducated grifter with a manufactured history, a working-class opportunist who had seduced a vulnerable heiress to loot the company. He turned to the assembled directors and asked them, gravely, to protect the Alvarez legacy from reputational ruin by voting to remove Elena as CEO. He never got to the vote. Marcus, standing quietly at the back with a laptop, had spent an hour before the gala doing what a former Navy engineer with a working knowledge of secure systems could do to a ballroom's presentation feed. The screen behind Julian flickered, and Julian's falsified documents vanished, replaced by something live and encrypted and damning. The audit trail, the shell companies, Meridian Logistics, Coastal Freight Partners, the payment records, the last-minute route changes. All of it scrolling upward in front of 300 people and a dozen cameras, every thread tracing back through its careful layers to one name. Elena stepped to the podium uninvited, took the microphone from Julian's frozen hand, and began, calmly, to read the wire transfers aloud. The delays that had tanked the stock, the sabotage that had made her look weak, the men Julian had paid to damage his own family's ships so he could blame her for the wreckage. The room turned on him in real time, a low roar building, reporters surging forward, and then Eleanor rose from her chair, 81 years old and utterly unhurried, and crossed to the stage, carrying the archival folder. She laid the 12-year-old blueprints on the podium under the lights. For 12 years, she said, her thin voice carrying to every corner of the silent atrium, this family has told a story about the miracle that saved us. We never knew the name of the engineer who did it, because that good man never asked us to. He asked for nothing, he saved everything. She turned and looked directly at Marcus. His name is Marcus Vance, and my granddaughter is going to marry him, and any one of you who has a problem with that is welcome to explain to the press how you nearly voted out the woman who just caught the man robbing you blind. Julian was suspended by the board within the hour and led out through a side door as the authorities arrived, and the cameras caught all of it, and the story that ran the next morning was not the one he had spent 3 years and $200,000 trying to write. 6 months later, there was a wedding. Not in a ballroom, not under chandeliers. It was held on the working edge of the harbor, on the very docks where a broken-down boat had once drifted into a repair shop in a storm. The tin roof strung with lights, folding chairs on the weathered planks, the smell of salt and rain, and the good food from the diner, where a man had once refused a briefcase full of cash. Elena wore something simpler than cream silk and looked happier than she ever had in diamonds. Her father, chastened and changed, walked her down an aisle of dockboards and, when he handed her to Marcus, held the younger man's calloused hand a beat longer than a handshake needed, and said, "Lo, the thing he should have said in the study. Thank you, and I'm sorry." Eleanor sat in the front row like a queen, and Lily, 9 years old, wearing a dress she'd agreed to only after negotiating the right to keep her telescope beside her chair, stood as the maid of honor, beaming up at the woman who had drifted in with a storm and stayed to become her family. The empire held. The foundation, at last, was the kind that doesn't bend when the weather turns. And that's the whole story. An heiress who stopped keeping the peace, a mechanic who was a hero long before anyone knew his name, and one little girl with a telescope who watched it all come true. If this one kept you in your seat right to the last dockboard, do me a small kindness and hit subscribe so the next story reaches you the moment it's ready. Thank you.